So Āsāḻhā Full Moon. What happened on Asalha Full Moon? I mean, referring to the Buddha's life, or the Bodhisatta's life. Do you all know? There's actually three major events on that full moon. At least one. Come on, guys, give me at least one. Which full moon is the Buddha's enlightenment? Exactly. So that was 2 months ago in the calendar. And Vesak is quite easy already because you have to remember only one date for enlightenment, Sammasambodhi, birth, and passing away, Parinibbana. So you already made it easy for us. Exactly. The first formal discourse, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Now, this is usually the main thing which we commemorate. And this is a reason that is also known as the Dhamma Day. Now, sometimes we call Vesak the Buddha Day and Asalha the Dhamma Day, because it was the first formal teaching where other human beings that would realize the Dhamma as well, and many, many devas. And then we call Magha Puja with the Ovada Patimokkha and the Sangha Day, because 1250 Arahants spontaneously assembled in a very large assembly of enlightened disciples. Our Buddha statue, does it have anything to do with any of these dates we've been talking about? Exactly. How did you recognize that? Exactly, because with the first discourse the Buddha was teaching what is known as a Pancha Vagya, the group of 5. And they are represented in the pedestal of our Buddha statue. Is there anyone else apart from the 5 ascetics? Aha, what are the deer doing there? Exactly, he gave it in the deer park. That was close to Varanasi, but the Buddha would usually stay in nature. He wouldn't stay in the city. In fact, in all these events, also Vesak, even the passing away, even the birth, they always happened in nature. And I'm sure that this is a message to us. That this is why we are called in a forest tradition, wilderness tradition. That this is why you have to drive a bit if you want to get to Dhammagiri. You can probably find a Buddhist temple which is closer to your home. But the whole idea of the forest tradition is not to follow the example the Buddha set already at his birth, and then continued enlightenment under a tree. And also the first discourse in a park-like setting several kilometers from the big city. Those days Varanasi was one of the biggest cities in India. And it was a deer park. But I also feel it's beautiful because it represents that the Buddha was not only teaching humans. It represents that many other beings and classes of beings were benefiting because he had compassion to all beings, not only to humans. And some of the figures in the background of the main Buddha statue represent mythological beings. And they say that this particular flower arrangement represents the high Devalokas and Brahmalokas. Because the main Buddha statue also refers to that first sermon. Now this is the mudra, the teaching mudra. And if you see a Buddha statue with this particular hand gesture, it always refers to Asalha full moon day and the first discourse of the Buddha. In fact, this is using a very famous Indian sandstone statue from the Gupta period as its basic pattern. And then it has been modified, and one reason why we choose this Buddha statue is because it combines influences from different Buddhist traditions, how they do the Buddha statues. So the basic idea is this famous Sarnath Buddha statue, which is in the museum in Sarnath now, where you also have the lion capital, which is now on the seal of India, from King Ashoka, is in the same museum. Because of that, it's unfortunately very, very protected. You can't take even a photo little camera in there. That is a famous Gupta piece made from stone, and is so outstanding that any copy I have seen never reaches any of the beauty of the original. It's truly amazing. It is very often copied, particularly in India. You see copies all over. And I've never seen a copy which would ever get close to the original. Very powerful. Unfortunately, so much has been destroyed, particularly in the Muslim invasions in India, Buddha statues and temples. And this was actually not a main Buddha statue. It was just most likely in a niche outside of some Buddhist temple. So we can only imagine what a main Buddha statue made at that time would have looked like. There's this well-known legend about the main Buddha statue in the temple in Bodh Gaya, because that was conquered by a Hindu king at some stage who was also anti-Buddhist. And then he wanted to destroy the Buddha statue. And they say when he came in to do that, he actually felt unable to do it, because the expression of compassion, of karuna, was so beautifully executed that even this fierce king didn't have the heart. And then he gave orders to generals to destroy it. But what they also didn't want to do it, and what they did, they just put a wall in front of that Buddha statue, and then pretended it had been destroyed. And behind the wall, which they put in the brick wall, they left an oil lamp as a puja. And they say when many years later, after it became Buddhist again, when they opened that brick wall, the oil lamp was still burning. This is quite a nice legend. But you can imagine what the main Buddha statues would have looked like if even a minor one already had this beauty that no one can even do a copy nowadays. So we didn't even try. This was no attempt to copy it, because it usually doesn't turn out so nice anyhow. And this one is also not really a statue. It's more like what you call a bas relief. So it's not very deep. And it would look odd if you copy that one-on-one, if it's not in a niche, not a relief, but a freestanding Buddha statue. So instead, the robes, for example, are more like Mahayana, like what you would have in China. And the shop doing it was Thai, so some of the ornamentation is very Thai. So it's a mixture, because we have a multinational community here, and we felt a Buddha statue that doesn't follow only one style of one nationality is actually the best for us. However, the Indian original had two devas, left and right of the Buddha's head. But for this one, they had taken that out, because sometimes people feel the feet of the devas are a little bit too close to the Buddha's head. But I wouldn't feel like that. But we took the statue the way it had already been designed as a second copy. But normally you have the devas represented as well, which is nice. Because now how many human beings attained enlightenment at that first sermon? Who? Venerable Anya Kondanyo. His name was Kondanya, and the Buddha uttered the inspired exclamation, Anyasi Vatabo Kondanyo, Anyasi Vatabo Kondanyo, at the end of the discourse, which means Kondanyo indeed really understands. Kondanyo indeed truly understands. So Anyan is true knowledge, true understanding. So he had got the new name Kondanyo, who truly understands. But even him, it was only on the first level of the stages of enlightenment. Now, there are 4 levels of enlightenment described by the Buddha and experienced by many beings. The stream entry, once returning, non-returning, and arahantship, full nibbana. So it was actually really the minimum. Only one other human being, and only on the first stage of 4. Which is very unusual, because other Buddhas, when they would start teaching, it would be much, much higher numbers. But our Buddha was born when the human lifespan is only 100 years. That seems to be the lowest human lifespan where Buddhas get born at all. According to Buddhist cosmology and the long-term history, the human lifespan actually varies from about 100,000 years, when humans are almost like devas, down to 10 years, when there will be a awful war and a big slaughter, because they don't even know anymore what is good and evil and what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. That varies between that. And the longer the lifespan, the more deva, angel-like are the human beings. The one with 100,000 years lifespan, they have only 4 diseases. That is hunger, thirst, urination, and defecation. Which is also interesting that these are classed as diseases. But in a sense they are. Devas don't do that apparently. At least not the last 2. And the spiritual development and virtue and the purity of heart is naturally much higher when the lifespan is high. And as they become more corrupted, as a karmic consequence, their children have shorter lifespan. And as they become more corrupted, then it drops down. And in our age, we are down to about 100 years. And it's actually 3 orders of magnitude away from the top level, and only 1 order of magnitude from the lowest. So we are more towards the bottom. This is the reason that there wasn't so many attainments, but it was still successful, 1 human being, and they say that many devas attained. Anything else that happened on Āsāḻhā? One you can calculate, because the Buddha was born on Vesak. What can you calculate then? Yeah, conception, the descent of the Bodhisatta into his mother's body. Because the Bodhisatta Mata, the mother of the being to be enlightened, we shouldn't call the Buddha until the night under the Bodhi tree, until he attained Sammasambodhi. Before that, even if he would talk about himself, he would only call himself the Bodhisatta, the being to be enlightened. Because until that night under the Bodhi tree, although he had the highest level of parami, he hadn't realized enlightenment yet. And he would consistently only call himself, and he talked about the time before enlightenment as Bodhisatta. So the conception, and it's stated that all mothers of all Buddhas will always carry the Bodhisatta for exactly 10 months from conception. Not for 9 or longer, no, but exactly 10 months. So Asalha was the dream. Do you know that story, how that happened? They say that Queen Mahāmāyā was exceptionally virtuous, because when the Buddha decides, before he passes away in Tusita heaven, when he decides where he will get reborn, he will only pick virtuous parents, even more so the mother. So she was actually observing the 8 precepts. She was observing the Uposatha day. And Vesak is very hot, so at noon she had a short rest, lying down, and in that short rest she had a dream. And in the dream the Devas took her to a kind of a divine palace, and then she lied down there, and then she saw an elephant with 7 tusks. And that elephant was white and very beautiful, and it respectfully circumambulated her 3 times and then entered her body from the right side. And shortly after that dream, then they realized that she was pregnant. So there was a Bodhisatta using the white elephant. Those days, the elephant was the most powerful animal, a huge, powerful animal, and that it's white and has more tusks than normal, and it showed that this is not even a normal elephant, and flying and so on. And it also shows the respect the Bodhisatta has to his parents. So this is Asalha. There's also one event on Āsāḻhā Full Moon. So they already knew that they don't have a kind of average baby. They knew they have something very special. Is there anything else how the mother would know that this is not a normal baby? Do you know that story? It's a very special pregnancy. It's the most extraordinary pregnancy you can have. For example, she is never having any morning sickness or anything like that. She feels perfectly healthy. Another one is that she can actually, in her internal eye, she can see the embryo, but not as an embryo. She sees it like a real baby with all faculties already there. This is how she can see him internally. It is also said that she becomes naturally virtuous. So she doesn't have to make an effort to keep the 5 precepts. She doesn't feel any inclination due to the high purity of the Bodhisatta and the close connection. She wouldn't feel any temptation to break any precepts. It's also said that she loses all sensual interest in any man. So they already knew there's something special coming. And then at the birth were more miraculous things happening. We can talk about that on Vesak. Birth was Vesak. And after even more miraculous things happening at the birth, the child being first received by the Devas and Brahmas, not by humans, the mother giving birth standing, the child making 7 steps and declaring that he is the foremost and will not have another rebirth. So obviously now they call it the astrologers and fortune tellers. They would do that anyhow. The king would always, for his crown prince, firstborn son, obviously you get all the full rituals and any special treatment. And this would usually be a job for the Brahmins. So the Buddha's father, the Bodhisatta's father, King Suddhodana, called 5 Brahmins to make a prediction. What is this child is so unusual, what's going to happen with him? And these 5 Brahmins came, and you know the prediction they made? It's a well-known prediction. What did they predict? Exactly. They predict that if he stays in the household life, if he remains in the palace and becomes a king, he would become a Chakravarti ruler, a wheel-turning emperor, who would rule the whole world, or at least the whole continent, without force and violence, just by the power of his righteousness. But if he goes forth and becomes an ascetic, then he would become a Buddha and take away the veil from this world, the veil of illusion. This is what 4 of the Brahmins said. But the youngest one, interestingly, had one dissenting opinion. And this dissenting opinion was, there's only one course, and he was convinced that this baby will definitely go forth and will become a Buddha. Who was that young dissenting Brahman? That was Kondanya, exactly. So these Brahmins, having made this prediction, what do you think? When the Buddha left the household life and became an ascetic, what would they do? Because they obviously, when they believe their own prediction, they must know that now he will become a Buddha, which is extremely rare. Now, sometimes for whole eons in one world system, which is probably one solar system, in one solar system you wouldn't have a Buddha at all for a whole eon, for billions of years. So special. However, they couldn't join because they were too old. It took about 30 years, and often these Brahmins, king would call, and they would be very old. They may have already been 70, 80 years old at the time of the fortune telling. So they couldn't actually physically do it. But they asked some younger relatives, some sons or grandsons or nephews. Except for Kondanyo, because he was the youngest, he was still young enough. But then later he would be quite old actually, for that reason. But he went personally, so that they would be with the Buddha or with the Bodhisatta, and the moment he actually realizes full enlightenment, they would be there and he can immediately teach them. And on what day was it that the Bodhisatta left the palace? In the middle of the night, taking one last look at his wife, who was the most beautiful girl in the whole country, and had just given birth, and was lying there in their bedroom with a little baby in her arms, and he takes one last look and sneaks out, climbs his white stallion Khantaka, and rides off in the Indian full moon night. On what full moon night? June? Maybe July? Asalha. There's a third event which we can recollect on Asalha Full Moon. Now, the crucial decision of the Bodhisatta. He had seen the 4 signs, and he finally decided and he had to go. Shortly after the birth of his son, the later legend that dramatized that it's actually basically the same day, that may be a slight dramatization, but he had a young child. And he realized that the attachment to the child may be so strong that he may not make it anymore if he doesn't go now. Do you know the 4 signs? Why did he decide to leave the household life? He had a very good life, and he had 3 palaces, a warm one for the cold season, like this one, a nice, comfortable one for the rainy season, and a nice, cool one for the hot season. In the rainy season, he wouldn't leave the palace at all, and he would be spending the whole rainy season entertained only by female musicians and servants. So why does he leave that kind of thing behind? He's a crown prince. He has a prediction that he will become the greatest king ever, but without any violence. Aha, what are the divine messengers? Is that a beautiful deva, radiant and beautiful? You said, you're telling me that a sick man is a divine messenger? Aha. So what is it?
The sick man, the old man, the dying man, and the
Number 4?
and then the samana.
The samana, the monk, the ascetic, exactly. I think the sequence is usually old, sick, dead, and then the ascetic. Encountering old age, sickness, death, gave him sufficient samvega, shocked him out of his complacency. The way that described is very literally that he's on the chariot riding through the town, and then there's this really old man, and then he is asking the charioteer, because he had never seen that. His father, the king, made sure that there's no old people around, so that he doesn't get any wrong ideas. And however, I think there's also a kind of symbolical, metaphorical meaning in that. You probably don't have a chariot, no? Do you have a chariot and a charioteer? But do you sometimes go out and try to enjoy this world? More metaphorically? Going out, having fun, off into the valley yesterday night. And when you're trying to enjoy your life, has it ever happened that you encounter old age, sickness and death? And that you ask the charioteer, what is that? Have you ever asked the charioteer when you encountered an old person, what is that? Who is a charioteer? That's a symbol for mindfulness and wisdom. And ideally, it should be mindfulness and wisdom guiding the chariot of your life, where you go and what you do. And although it sounds a little bit naive, you think, is the Bodhisatta really so naive? And then he asks the charioteer, what is that? And then he asks him, is it only this person, or do others get old? Would I get old? And my beautiful wife, Yasoda, would she also get old like that? And it sounds very naive, no? But it's actually showing the great wisdom, because we are often not asking that question. Have you ever seen a really old person? Difficult to avoid, no? But you may not have asked the question from your wisdom faculty, what is that actually? Is that something that's also happening in my body? Will I be like that? Fortunately, nowadays you have got apps which can do that. No? I believe, has anyone got that app where you can make yourself old? You take a selfie and then the AI turns you into an old person? Have you got that? Or why not? Okay. You do it the other way around. Making yourself young, yeah. This is what they like, what they prefer. I think they also have that on YouTube. Quite fascinating. They usually with some celebrities or movie stars. And I think some are with AI, and some are also simply using photos. And if these celebrities already have become old or have passed away. I find photos from Greta Garbo, they are quite mind-blowing. Because to me, she had this absolute mind-blowing beauty. I'm not sure whether you're still aware of this. She started in the silent movie area and then in the 1930s talkies, but was by many considered the most beautiful woman around. And then she died, I think, in the early 90s. And some paparazzi, although she hadn't done a movie since 1941 until 1990, and some paparazzis were still after her. And one managed to get a few photos when she's in her 90s. It's quite fascinating to look at that and compare that. And then to ask your mindfulness, your wisdom, is that only Greta Garbo turning from exquisite beauty to like that? Or is it also my body? And the bodies of the ones I love and so on. So the Bodhisatta did ask that question, and then even being in the palace and being locked in, the guards had strict order that he wouldn't be able to leave the city, and the gate was closed. So how did he get out? Now he's only the crown prince, the father, the king is in charge. And if those days, if you don't follow the king's order, your head gets chopped off immediately. So there was a very strong guard on the city gate. You can actually still see that. I believe the genuine Kapilavatthu is the one in Nepal, where they do excavations. And they have identified the eastern gate. So you can actually see the ruins of the eastern gate, where the Bodhisatta rode out to the east, into the full moon night on Asalha Puja. I find it an incredible, inspiring place. This is the act now of great renunciation. Mahabhinikkama, the great going forth. You can see the wounds. So if there's a strong garrison and all these tough soldiers and the gate is locked, it's locked anyhow at night and no one can get in there. So how did he do that? The devas just opened. That's what they say. The devas just opened. Sounds like a funny story, but there's an amazing one about the senior Western disciple of Ajahn Chah, who I believe, from what I hear, is still in robes. And he had the intention to ordain as a Buddhist monk. And he was in Bangkok, and when he had this intention, it was in the middle of the night when he arrived at, I think it was Wat Bhuvan. It's one of the big main Thai temples in Bangkok. And when he came, then a very friendly, elderly gentleman, Thai, in a bit old-fashioned dress, opened the gate for him and let him in, and showed him also a little bit around in that famous temple, explained a few things, and then showed him a place where you can have a little mat, and said, now you just lie down and sleep, and the monks will be coming soon. And when the monks came, they were very surprised to find this Westerner, this Farang, in the early morning. And they asked him, how did you come in? Because that thing is locked at night. And then they said, no, here the elderly caretaker, he opened the gate for me. And they asked, which gate did he open? And then he showed them the main gate of the monastery. And by that stage, they actually got him to the head monk, who was one of the most important monks in Thailand. Because the main gate is never used, or maybe for some very big ceremony, I don't know. And it's normally absolutely no one opens that, and it would be requiring the extraordinary effort to organize opening the main gate. And everyone is using, even the senior monks are using all kinds of other secondary gates. And they were also not aware of any person who would fit that description of this obscure caretaker. And the head monk gave him a really thorough interview and also asked him some question. And apparently this caretaker also gave him some interesting explanations about some of the artwork exhibited, which normally people wouldn't know and so on. So it created quite some stir. But you see, if you really want to ordain, and this one was apparently a good one, he is still in robes. I'm not sure which one it is. But sufficiently that he is obviously managing a long time in robes. If you really want to do it, there will be support. Have faith.